The following transmission contains unencrypted instances of explicit language. Mature audiences are cleared to proceed.
David, I'm starting to think there's a mole at MI6.
What? Sure hope it's not some creepy KGB spy master.
The year is 1965 and the Cold War, baby. It's a cooking.
Todd, do you like park bench scenes? Because I know I do.
Are you talking about where two dudes sit at a park bench and pretend they don't know each other and just kind of talk out of the sides of their mouths at each other and talk about spy stuff?
Absolutely. Like Michael Keaton and Alfred Molina locking horns, baby.
It's the Pickle Factory, Cockroach Alley, the CIA.
With exactly 3 more scenes of 2 spies sitting at a park bench than in all the Aliens movies combined.
David! Are we here today to talk about The Company?
Yes, we are.
Shall we begin? Let's begin.
A best-selling novel of the same name leads cable network TNT XX to greenlight a 4.5-hour miniseries that explores the early years of the CIA. Big shot producers Ridley Scott and brother Tony Scott bring some name recognition to the table with Michael Keaton, Alfred Molina, and what probably looked like a safe bet at the time, Chris O'Donnell. I'm Todd.
And I'm Dave, and we like talking about spy movies.
That is correct, Dave, and this is a mini-series that is most definitely steeped in pure tradecraft and fairly historical as well. So let's talk about The Company in this episode of Spies Like Us.
Well, the story deals with a mole, and something interesting about the term the mole. It was actually coined to the public by Jean Le Carré in 1974 in his Tika Taylor Soldier Spy when they were kind of talking about Kim Philby. Now, we're not really sure if they weren't using the term in, I guess, the intelligence world, but this definitely was coined by Jean Le Carré to the public after writing Tika Taylor Soldier Spy.
So you're saying this is possibly anachronistic. We're going to talk about moles a lot in this miniseries, and it's possible that in 1955 that term possibly didn't exist. We're not sure.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a whole lot of moles going on. There's moles for the moles in this story. This is definitely pure Cold War tradecraft. We're going into this. We're jumping in the deep end.
Well, this is a 2007 miniseries. We mostly talk about movies on this show, or at least that's the plan. But we do want to fit in some other media as well. This one's based on a best-selling novel by a guy named Robert Littell. Not sure about the pronunciation of that. From 2002. And we're only going to talk about the first episode of this one because we really found a lot to talk about in it.
So this is kind of like semi-historical, where there's a bunch of real characters in it, but the main characters are somewhat inspired by real people, but are mainly fudged fictional characters. Like, I think Alfred Molina was based on someone real.
Yeah, he absolutely is.
Yeah.
But as far as I could tell, like, only his name was changed, and I think we talk about that more later in the episode. But yeah, I think it's the central character that Chris O'Donnell plays that's an amalgam, if I'm using that word and
Yeah, I think
pronouncing that word correctly.
I would call him an amalgam.
Yeah, of other people, and yeah, he's kind of like placed in this situation where like he possibly could have been involved in all these events. It's basically like you're walking a fictional character through the events of a bunch of historical figures. Would you say that's right?
Absolutely.
The Company, the series overall, covers CIA events going from 1955 to 1991. What do you have a year that you think of as being officially the, I don't want to say that, I'm not trying to say that at the time people said like, okay, the Cold War is beginning now, but but it,
Well, I think a lot of people have argued that it's gone back farther than it's talked about. I mean, I believe Russia has been planting seeds for a very long time. And prior to the establishment of the CIA, we didn't even have a long running intelligence agency. We kind of were like very hands off, like gentlemen don't read the mail of other gentlemen type of situation. We would only have intelligence during wartime. But other countries did not feel the same way and
I
had
mean, in some
like
ways,
everywhere.
the roots of the Cold War clearly like uh, reach all the way into during the events of World War II, depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah, I would probably. I mean, like I've heard people, like I've read and seen talk to people that they argued that it might have like started even before that. But I mean, we were allied with the Russians, and so it would have been very easy for them to start, I guess, building groundwork for a hefty, I guess, operation of watching, keeping tabs on the U.S.
Which we know now in retrospect. Of course, we didn't know that. At least the public definitely didn't know it at the time. When do you think? I don't know. I don't know. We're not really of that generation. But when do you think? When do you think the Cold War started to like become a term in the public knowledge? I'm just asking you a question. I know you're just only capable of probably taking a guess at, but I'm curious. What do you think?
Oh, I don't. I have no idea. Probably just before they took down the wall. I don't know. I don't know. The public probably didn't know about all this stuff till about the '80s, maybe.
I
But I mean, I
feel
could be wrong.
I I feel like that's correct, but then like in 1980, that's like, I'm born in 71 and 1980 is like I'm 9 years old. That's when Reagan first makes his play for the presidency. That's when I first become anywhere near like politically aware, even like as a 9-year-old kid.
Yeah,
And
like there are presidents and they exist.
if there were if there were if there were people public figures talking about the Cold War before 1980, I don't know, but for sure Reagan put that shit into stark relief. Like he made no bones about the fact that we are involved in a conflict of epic good and evil versus Russia, blue versus red, eagle
Yeah,
versus bear.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's what his entire presidency kind of hung on. That and like jump starting inflation, I guess.
All right, well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Let's head to the briefing room, yep?
Let's do it.
Voice pattern recognized. Retinal scan complete. Validating security clearance. Clearance granted. You may now enter the briefing room.
1955 in Berlin is where we start the movie, and there's a Russian defector or wannabe defector that as part of arranging for getting him out of Berlin safely, he promises to give Harvey Toriti, who's played by Alfred Molina, some information about a Russian mole in MI6.
Taridi's the guy that runs the operations in Berlin, trying to watch what's going on over there. He's kind of, I guess, the head handler of all the agents in Berlin.
For what agency?
For the CIA.
Right, this movie's mostly about the CIA. We'll see a little bit of KGB and a little tiny bit of MI6 in it, but it's mostly a CIA series.
Our main characters are all from the CIA.
Yeah. So Tariti, he's obviously really interested in this information. He communicates it to HQ and prepares the extraction. And then we cut to Washington, where another of our heavy hitter characters, Angleton, James Jesus Angleton?
Yeah, James Jesus Angleton.
Right.
He's actually, the character's actually based on a real person.
Right.
Who started he was the head of the counterintelligence department of the CIA at the time.
Right. So he's the right person that you would communicate this information to, right?
Right. Tariti would, yes.
Right.
Um,
But then Angleton, pretty much in that same scene, he alerts his best friend Philby from MI6 about
Also based on a real person, but yeah.
right about the extraction and the operation, and we go back to Berlin. The extraction gets busted up by the Berlin police and KGB, and Tariti's mad as hell about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much how this series starts. And, spoiler alert, I don't think it's really too difficult to figure out what happened here, right, Dave?
No, definitely not. That mole happened to be Kim Philby. And so Angleton, the head of intelligence, has been hanging out with this guy and pretty much tells the mole the information that they found a guy that has information on the mole, which ends up
pretty much in the first, 6-7 minutes of the movie? 10 minutes?
Right. Yeah.
I keep calling it a movie, and I'm probably going to keep calling it a movie, even though it is a miniseries.
Miniseries, yeah. But I mean, each episode of the miniseries is pretty much like a film length.
It totally feels like a movie.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the basics of what happened. I feel like the film maybe kind of knew. Well, I mean, maybe they were just trying to like get through the story real quick. But I feel like they probably tried to like sneak that Philby leak in like really quick before we like were actually maybe as an audience leaning in and starting to pay attention.
Yeah. Right.
Because that seems like the only way to pull it off. My nose started twitching when I saw it the first time, specifically when Keaton says, we're going to have, it's really important we keep this under wraps until tomorrow night? Like,
yeah.
You couldn't sit on this information for one fucking day?
Yeah. Yeah.
But we think that this really happened. We know Angleton's a real character. Philby's a real character.
Yeah, they're both real people. I don't know if the scene happened where like he just gives sense of information the night before to Kim Philby. Yeah, but in the movie, that's what happened.
Do we know if Angleton was the leak, though?
Angleton was not the leak. Kim Philby was the leak.
Philby's the mole, but Angleton is leaking the information to Philby.
Oh yeah. This is very well known. They were homies for like a while and would exchange information. So Kim Philby, the real Kim Philby, was an MI6 agent who is actually a double agent for the KGB, who was hanging out with the head of counterintelligence, the CIA, regularly sharing information. And so when that news broke, it was a big deal. Yeah.
Friends for 15 years. They have dinner. They have dinner like every week together.
Yeah.
And we covered that. Okay, so Angleton and Philby, definitely real characters. Tariti, interestingly, he's based on a real character, and by based on, it seems like it's really like just basically like renamed. It's not like a loose interpretation of a character. It's literally like a real guy whose name, let me grab it real quick. William King Harvey was the actual guy. And in this, he's called Harvey Tariti. And again, that's Alfred Molina. And if you have those three characters in your mind, Tariti, Angleton, Philby, you know everything you need to know about the main plot of the movie. The main plot of the movie is Tariti is going to figure out how to figure out who the MI6 mole is, and Philby's going to run away. That's what's going to happen in the story, and we wanted to just lay that out for you because the interesting part of discussion is like talking through about how it actually all plays out. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it playing out is really what made the movie a great experience. Because like you said, that's pretty much what the story boils down to. There's a mole. They try and find the mole. Mole gets away, type of thing. But there's a ton of stuff that plays out getting from A to B.
Right, and a lot of it interconnects with this other subplot. But to keep things simple, we're going to talk through the main plot from beginning to end. Then we'll circle around, describe the subplot, and as we do that, we'll point out the ways that they connect up with each other.
Sounds good.
All right. At this point, Angleton seems like he's not as convinced that there actually is a mole, and he kind of like puts it back on, makes it seem like it was a fuck up on Taridi's part, which makes Taridi even madder. And
Yeah.
Taridi sets out to try to like prove on this little piece of evidence that he's got, and he's got just the information that there is a mole. There was supposed to be more information coming. There was going to be the defector was going to bring a tape recording of the mole's last briefing, but since the extraction got messed up, that information never came through. So basically, at this point, we just have a hunch. Not a hunch. We have a tip that there's a mole, and that's it.
Yeah.
And so the first step Taridi's got to do here is he's going to have to prove that a mole actually exists. And he's going to do this through the use of something called a barium meal.
So the actual barium meal is something that they give patients who are getting x-rays to show up on the x-ray to show like their esophagus or their stomach or organs or whatever. In this sense, in this movie, they're actually using it as kind of the idea of catching the mole. So it's kind of like a play on words, or kind of like a metaphor for the idea that they're going to feed some information on, and send out a memo that is going to suss out a mole, because they're going to limit where that information is released to and see how the mole reacts. And so that's mainly what they're talking about when they talk about a barium meal. It's specifically sending out information to a specific source to kind of narrow down who the mole might be.
Right. So, like, let's say I've got 5 people that one of them could be the mole. If I give them all a piece of information that is, I give them each a different piece of information.
Right.
And it's got to be something that they would act upon.
Right.
And
right. Exactly.
The other key is that they all need to think that they all got the same piece of information.
Right.
Because otherwise, you would know that you can't act on it, because, like, if I told you in confidence just this one secret thing, and then, someone comes around telling me that they heard this one secret thing about me, and you're the only person I ever told.
Right.
Well, then I know that you're the leak.
Right. Exactly.
But in this case, we don't have a specific person in mind yet. Remember, Taridi just needs, right now, he just wants to confirm the fact there is a mole at MI6. So if we just give the information to MI6 and nobody else, and that information gets acted on, then all we'll know at that point is that someone at MI6 is a mole.
Right. And that's exactly what he did. Taridi gives the information to a source he had in London that works for the MI6 to release this information out. And he only sent it through MI6 channels. So that way he could narrow down, yes, in fact, there is a mole at MI6.
And this is our first park bench scene.
Yes, it is.
In this movie, Taridi sits with his English friend at a park bench, and they just seem to be having a casual conversation. And I just love it. It's a super cute trope of spy movies.
Yes, it is.
And it's not going to be the last park bench scene that we see in this movie.
We definitely get many park bench scenes.
Yeah, I love it. And the other piece of information we get here in this scene is when he brings up the possibility of there being a mole at MI6, his English friend does say, well, there was a rumor years back of a mole in MI6 named Parsival, codenamed Parsival. But it's just an old rumor, old rumor. Nobody really pays attention to it anymore.
And I think he said that they had that rumor had been eliminated. That they weren't able to find a mole, and that they think it was just a rumor and it was all made up.
And and as far as I could tell, I Googled Parseval. I couldn't find that in any information about this story. So I'm not sure that the real life MI6 mole's code name was Parseval.
No, I don't think so either.
Okay. The information that is published in the memo to MI6 is specifically that Turidi knows that there's a mole and that he knows the mole's identity, which, of course, is not true. However, he's certain that if this information reaches the mole will definitely try to wipe Turidi out or capture or kill him so that before he can get that information out. And that is indeed what happens. So talk to me about how the KGB did this.
Well, basically, what they were trying to do was smoke out Harvey to get him out in public because they wanted to basically kill him to protect their mole.
I want to kill Turidi. Why don't I just go kill him?
They probably didn't know where he was.
Of course they don't. He's a CIA secret agent. So what do you do?
So they called him and said, "Hi, there's a person that has some interesting information. I think we presume that it's a list of names that are possible moles or double agents, and what they're thinking is they're offering him some real information that he can't ignore, and so he's going to come out and then they're going to shoot him or dispose of him however they do that. So that's why he would go out."
And he goes to a church where he meets a lady who shows him something on a piece of paper, says, "Are you interested in this?" He says, "Yes, I'm very interested." She says, $25,000. He says, "Fuck yeah." And then on his way out, he gets ambushed. Some KGB, or I don't know, they could be hired thugs. It's not established here, but some guys jump out of the alley and start shooting at him. He's prepared though. He had his protege in the car with a Tommy gun, and he had a couple of his agents that were actually inside the church, posing, it looked like, as clergy. Yeah. So they come out of the back door. They shoot those guys. The cops show up immediately, which we're immediately saying okay, that sounds fishy.
Yeah.
Harvey's protege does say "Hey, how did they show up so fast?"
Yeah.
Harvey says, "Light them up," and protege does. They just shoot the cops because Harvey was under no illusions that was going to be part of the trap, which is pretty cool. And our Berlin station crew gets out of there. So now Turidi is certain that the defector's information was correct. There is a mole at MI6, so he's going to narrow it down with a further barium mail. We meet up again with his friend in London. They're at the same park. Unfortunately, they decide not to sit at a bench. This is kind of a missed opportunity. But there's still benches in the scene. And who knows, maybe there's some other spy stuff going on in the background that we don't know about by other people sitting at park benches. I like to think so.
Yeah.
Now, at this point now, so obviously our London guy, now he's also convinced that Turidi is correct about his suspicions, right?
Yeah, this first barium meal has confirmed it, because his friend at the MI6, which we're not really sure what his name was, but didn't believe it, and he was actually kind of a little funny, where he was just complaining about, "Look, I got 2 more years of retirement." But after this first barium meal, he's convinced that there is in fact a mole at MI6, and so now the meeting about possibly having some more information, which I think this is when the friend tells him that Philby is a possible suspect, right?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Why don't you lay that out for us real quick?
Yeah, so basically, he, in our first meeting at the park bench, he was saying, there was a rumor of a mole at some point.
It seemed like he kind of brought it up just in more of a way of saying, there's always rumors, you know.
Right, right. He was just kind of like, yeah, these things come up all the time, whatever. Now that he's actually convinced that there is one, he starts. We presume he starts looking into people and starts bringing up Philby as a possible suspect. Who Philby was stationed in South America at some point years before, and well, first he was married to a communist woman, and has done a lot to hide the fact that this ever happened.
Interesting.
Very interesting. And when he was stationed in South America, he checked out every communist book in the MI6 library that was available to him. This could possibly be your suspect. And so he kind of helps out Tariti here by giving him someone to look at.
Right. So the second barium meal is going to be more targeted.
Right.
And actually, I think that at the end of the day, so the idea is now we're going to give some information just to Philby. But Philby's going to think that everyone got it. So here, it's not clear what the mechanism of delivery is because he says he's got a memo that he wants his English friend to publish.
Yeah,
so
memo, yeah.
a memo goes to everyone, but I guess the idea would be English guy would give his secretary, because at this point, we don't have email or anything.
Yeah.
And I think copies of memos were probably all typed out, like every copy was typed out by hand.
Yeah. Back in that day, you would have secretaries just typing all day.
Right. I mean, I think they did have some like special paper so you could, I'm not sure about this, but some special paper that you could like type one and get like 3 copies of it because it would like go through or something like that.
Yeah, like carbon fiber paper or whatever.
I remember that. I remember that stuff.
Yeah.
We still had it around for certain applications when I was a kid. The other thing to mention though that doesn't quite make sense here, but I guess it's just done for the movie's expediency, is that Harvey shows up with the memo that he wants published already prepared, even though it's in this scene that his English friend tells him about Philby.
Right, yeah.
It's a tad bit clumsy if you look too closely at it. And this is not the only thing that I think kind of falls apart under really close scrutiny of this plot.
Yeah, definitely not the only thing that we're gonna get into, but it is kind of rushed by and it's a little shaky. We think it could have been done a little bit tighter, but the idea is that he's gonna send out more information and be able to narrow down who the mole is.
Right. And since they never tell us what the contents of this memo is, do you have any speculation, just any ideas of what it could be?
I actually think that he threw his whole operation under the bus, but I don't want to get into too much of that because we're going to talk about that a little bit later.
Oh, that's right. We are going to talk about that later. Good call. Good call.
Yeah, but I believe that this last barium meal is throwing his entire operation under the bus, which is very interesting later when we talk.
Yeah.
About
So in just a minute we'll start in on that subplot. We'll go back to the beginning of the movie, lay out the subplot and how it connects in with here. But just to finish up how the main plot ends, this barium meal, contents unknown, it pays off. Philby is definitely the mole, Tariti thinks. He makes his case against Philby in Washington, and Philby flees.
The day that Angleton was alerted about the extraction at the beginning, communications to Moscow went crazy through the roof.
Between the Russian embassy and Moscow.
Because during the time that this extraction was supposed to happen, Angleton is hanging out with Philby, telling him, exchanging information and talking to each other like the good buddies they are. The day, or I think it's the day that I guess Angleton would have brought that information up, communications to Moscow were going up to a noticeable amount, a very noticeable difference in communications had changed within that window. So that is one piece of hard evidence that somebody got that information to the Russian embassy, and they're saying that it's probably Philby, because Philby would have been the only other person that got that information.
I think Angleton was still like pissing on the idea that there was a mole, and it's the radio transmission thing that makes it seem very certain. And then of course Philby like not reporting to work and nowhere to be found is pretty much damning evidence against him. And we, just in case there was any doubt, we as the audience see him fleeing, right?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
we see him meeting with another undercover Russian agent who's prepared his extraction, which he's successful in escaping from the wrath of the CIA.
This in real life was actually a big deal when Kim Philby was found out. It sent James Angleton on a witch hunt, and he pretty much was like, everyone's a Russian mole until I prove otherwise, type of thing. And he actually sussed out the real James Angleton sussed out a lot of other moles that were working
really?
for TB. Yeah, but he went on this crazy witch hunt. Yeah, so the moment that Angleton in the movie realizes that all this happened under his nose, it like messes with his head, because he, at this point he's the head of counterintelligence and he's the leak, So this ends up setting us up for the next 2 episodes of this miniseries, where Angleton has come to realize that, Russia's putting moles all over the place,
They do seem to be awfully good at it.
Yeah. Dialing it back, we're going to be discussing the subplot of the movie that also intertwines with our main plot involving the mole. We're going to call it Operation Rainbow. Our main character, Jack, who's played by Chris O'Donnell, pretty much the protege of Toriti, is sent to go meet this lady who's also a dancer.
Where's this taking place?
This is in Berlin.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is still, there's the East and West, German. The wall is up at this point, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, there's that whole issue.
Well, actually, wait. I'm not 100% sure the wall is up, but there's definitely an East and West Berlin, and you're definitely like not supposed to be crossing back and forth willy-nilly. Maura, can you check us on that real quick?
Note: construction of the Berlin Wall commenced on August 13th of 1961.
Yeah, like without any, but our main character Jack is set to meet. He's basically going to be handling this, I guess, asset, we'll call her. She has a acquaintance or friend, we'll call it for now, whose code name is Sniper. Her code name is Rainbow. And Sniper is supposed to be some type of scientist or doctor or professor of some sort that has lots of really good information that he is going to give to Rainbow, and she is going to pass that information on to Jack. And so every week, Jack is going to meet with this young woman who I guess does ballet on the side of passing information off to spies. And every week he's going to show up to this dance studio that she practices at, and she will hand him a note that has some handwriting on it that contains information. That's pretty much the gist of this, I guess, operation. Is we're never really told what the information is, but being Sniper being a professor or doctor, we presume it's like scientific information of some sort. Or
actually, Dave, the first piece of information is some kind of
it's a code.
wait,
That's right.
Yeah, it's a code that helps them decrypt some transmissions that the CIA station has been intercepting but not able to decode.
Right.
So the first piece of information is like totally legit, And Harvey's really excited about it.
Yeah, super excited because all this information that's right, that code helped them basically open the door for them to get tons and tons of intel just because they're able to decrypt the communications that are coming out. Everything's going fine and dandy, except at one point they find out that she's been feeding them misinformation. After Jack confronts her, it turns out that she had been compromised and he's going to try and bring her out of Germany to save her life, but she refuses to leave without Sniper, who apparently she owes her life to, which is the professor that she's been getting this information from. Well, before they can get them out, the KGB get to Sniper and like hang him, and so they he looks like a suicide, and she ends up shooting herself. So that's pretty much the overall story of the Rainbow plot.
Right. Real quick, I was never quite clear. I know that in the wiki it says they killed him, and you say they killed him and made it look like he suicided. But to me, it actually makes more sense that he committed suicide, because if they want to kill him and then kill her, why leave the apartment? Why don't they just stick around in the apartment and whack her when she comes in?
Well, she ends up shooting herself. So maybe they don't want to kill her. Maybe they want to use her for something later.
Now, when she comes home and finds a note that he left, apparently, which I guess if you follow the murder hypothesis, then it's a forged note. But she reads a note, which makes her seem like totally horrified, and then she looks up and she sees that the professor has apparently hung himself. And then at that point, the KGB move in on the apartment in force with like a bunch of guys and a bunch of East Berlin police. Mostly like these operations. Same thing with the defection. It's the East German police that come in, but since in both cases they have KGB agents like with them, it just seems like kind of a little bit of a masquerade. It's a KGB operation disguised as a police operation.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. That maybe he really did kill himself. But then why would they be... That is interesting. Yeah, why wouldn't they just have gotten her after they killed her? That's really,
right.
I didn't even think about that. That's a really good point.
Okay. But anyways, like I said, the wiki says they killed him. I don't know. So here's how it all went down, though, right? After that first juicy piece of information, which was confirmed good, because that's not something you can fake, right? Like,
no,
if it's a code that is actually, the CIA station can validate it in that it actually does work and it does unencrypt the transmissions, unless the transmissions themselves were faked. But I don't think that's what's going on, because I think at this first part of the movie, when she feeds the first piece of information, she has not yet been compromised.
Right. But at some point they get her, and
if you're paying really close to the attention to the events of the movie, when's our first clue that she's been compromised?
Well, I mean, if you want to go with when she decides to go on the date with Jack, the whole time that they had been meeting, she's constantly telling, don't try to get close to me or learn who the professor is, or all of our, meetings will cease. You'll never get information from me. Well, he asks her out on a date and she's like, I'll never go. But she ends up going. So, which we thought was weird, because she was super adamant about being careful and not getting close to anybody. In fact, he tried to kind of woo her earlier, and she kind of pushed him aside and said, don't get close to me or whatever. But now all of a sudden she's like going full blast in on hanging out with Jack. So I think that's our first clue that she something different's going on. There's something weird going on.
She does when she does like drop her barrier and let him in. She does seem very upset about it, but not upset enough to like not go to bed with him, which they immediately do.
Right.
And we also at the time of their first kiss, we as the audience are treated to an exterior shot looking in through a window at them, which cinematically is supposed to convey the idea, whether or not it's literal or metaphorical, that they're being watched. But if you're taking every little bit as actually meaning something, at this point, yeah, we're pretty sure that she's compromised at this point. And then the other part of it that connects is that she disappeared for a while.
Yeah, that's right. And Jack was panicked. She was gone for like 2 weeks or something.
Right. She stopped making contact. He had no idea what had happened to her. He was worried that they had caught her and killed her, or maybe, possibly, or whatever.
Right.
That happened, interestingly or not, I'm not sure, but that did happen right after the delivery of the first barium meal, because it's while Taridi is waiting for that phone call that leads us to the church ambush that is when Jack is telling Taridi, his mentor and boss, about his concerns about Rainbow.
That's right. Yeah.
So, quick thing about Jack before I forget. Jack, I don't know if you mentioned, but Jack is played by Chris O'Donnell. And remember at the beginning of the episode, I was talking about Gore Vidal's creation and that one character that was fictionally manufactured by the author to have plausibly been able to have participated and met a bunch of people that, no actual person did follow this course in history, but it was a way of showing how a person could have lived through certain events in history. Right. And Jack is that character, and the reason I brought it up. Later in the series, I know he's involved in the Bay of Pigs incident.
Oh, in the whole series, he's involved in every major CIA operation that's ever happened during the Cold War. It's like ridiculous. Like there's no even though it's possible to have happened, there's no way somebody went and lived through and survived and like participated in all of those events like the way he did. Like he was solely responsible for training the entire South America, the Cuban army to go fight at the Bay of Pigs, by himself. Like it was pretty funny, but it's interesting because we get to see the course of the Cold War through the eyes of this one character.
Right, which is mainly like the premise of the miniseries as a whole. So yeah, fictional character, Jack. I don't think we have any reason to think that Rainbow and the Professor are actual characters from history, or that
somebody like them, But...
Oh yeah, obviously there are operations going on, but I think this whole Operation Rainbow thing is like it's an example of an operation that could have been information about this operation could have been used in figuring out how to suss out the MI6 mole.
Right.
So again, it's like probably a fictional operation that dovetails in with an actual operation, just like Jack is a fictional character that intersects with a whole bunch of historical figures.
Right.
One last thing, just before we forget, they did, right after they started Operation Rainbow, and let's see, they did follow her, even though she said not to. They did follow her, and they did bug her apartment, and that's going to become important later. Sometime after Rainbow's compromised and starts doing the kissy pee with Jack, he's approached by well, at first he doesn't seem creepy, but this guy in a nightclub. It's a guy that now, by the way, Jack graduated from Yale, and he was a rower, as you do if you're going to be in the CIA in 1955. It's almost essential that
you're in crew and went to Yale.
Right. And this guy didn't go to Yale, but he was also a rower for some other school, and he they they were kind of acquaintances. He said like we rode against each other once, and he kind of chats Jack up and seems really friendly and is talking about the United States and what's it like, and I'm thinking about maybe moving to Colorado, and but then it slowly unveils that Borisov, which is the guy's name, he's not a super important character. I don't think he doesn't show up more later in the series, does he?
I don't think so.
He's gonna have he's gonna have another couple scenes in this movie though, so I do want to mention his name. That's Borisov, and he offers Jack $150,000 for. I think he knows about the girl. Does he mention the girl? I'm not sure, but he just basically $150,000 for information.
Right.
Which Jack does not. Jack tells him to go fuck himself, basically.
Yeah, and he's really, really, really upset about it too. Like he's insulted that he would even be offered such a deal.
Right. Now, in case it's not explicitly clear in the nightclub scene, but Borisov is KGB. We'll definitely establish that in his next couple scenes. So here's my question to you, Dave.
Uh-huh.
All right, I'm the KGB, and I have compromised Rainbow. I have talked her into giving the Americans bad information, and they're buying it. They're buying it. What is the purpose of me going to Jack and offering him $150,000 for him to presumably tell me who he's getting his information from? I already know that.
Well, it's a way to double down on her to make her look more reliable. That they have no idea this operation's going on, and the information getting is completely reliable and accurate. And they're pretty much putting up this, I guess, idea to corner him. But let's say he does take the $150,000. They've now gotten a really, really good turncoat. You know what I mean?
I'm sorry, you faded out just a little bit. You got what?
They have a very, very solid turncoat at that point if Jack does decide to take the money. So they're kind of playing it out. Like, one, they're putting on this kind of show to try and make Rainbow's info more, I guess, believable. But if he does end up taking the money, they would have a very, very, very solid asset.
Very, very smart. So either way, like it's a hedging your bets thing. Either way, they win. They either are doubling down on what they have, which is Rainbow, or they're trading up to get an even more valuable person that's turned. Because we know the way this works is like once you do one thing for the enemy, you're stuck.
You can't get out.
You're turned because then they always have that to use against you, and then they get even more stuff out of you.
Right, exactly. So it's just never.
We saw that like over and over and over in the Americans.
Oh, all the time, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that was the whole point of that show, was like demonstrating how just the tiniest little baby first step, just the chink in the armor is all they need. That was also, I don't know, did you watch The Sopranos?
No, that came out like a while ago. I don't think I had HBO at that time. There's
this really, really super sad subplot where a girlfriend of one of Tony's crew gets turned by the FBI.
Well,
and it's so sad because like I forget how they first got her, but it totally wasn't her fault, and it's a really sympathetic character that you care deeply about, and you just feel so bad for her, like, because once they get the first thing on her, then they just turn on the screws. They're like, well, like at this point, all we have to do is like drop a dime on you, and you are fucking dead.
Yeah.
And that's what eventually happens, of course, after they bleed her dry.
Yeah.
Right. So that was the nightclub. Back in London, in the main plot, this is around the time in the movie where we see the second barium meal get delivered.
Yeah.
Then go ahead.
Suspicion is all right. This one, his friend in London kind of lets him know, hey, there's this guy Philby that is questionable.
Right.
I want to look into, yeah.
Right, which we talked about. And then Jack is listening to the wiretap of Sniper's apartment, or her apartment, their shared apartment. They live together, right?
Yeah, they live together.
Okay. And
Saved her life at some point, or like got her out or whatever. So
yeah, she's very devoted to him. And then during the scene, Jack gets ambushed by the KGB, and Borisov is there, and Borisov seems really keen on using this as a moment to find out where the ballerina is, where she lives.
Right.
It seems like they try to kill Jack, but he manages to get away. But later, we're going to find out that this was another charade. This is another example of Borisov being super sneaky like he was in the nightclub. They actually, Jack doesn't know this now. We, as the audience, don't know this now. But he will later figure out that even this ambush was just a way. They never planned on killing him.
They never planned on killing him. They never planned on really getting anything out of him. The whole point was just to double down on Rainbow so that he would trust her as a source.
Right. It's even more of that. But it also has that same, it occurs to me now, that same double purpose thing. Because, again, like, what if Jack is so afraid for his life that he gives up Rainbow right now? Well, I guess actually that doesn't work. So I guess they're trusting that he's going to be a tough cookie.
Yeah. We just want to talk.
Because the last thing you would want to do right now is have Jack tell you that who Rainbow is, because then your whole pipeline that you have of feeding bad information to the CIA is cut off.
Right.
So I'm presuming they're definitely counting on Jack to not fold and to think that he's just escaping by the skin of his teeth and saving, protecting his lady love.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I think I mentioned before, the whole Operation Rainbow thing, as the operation here, has two purposes. I think I only mentioned one. The second one was really just to introduce a love interest and a romantic story into this whole plot, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
This is just to give us some saucy romance. And, it's fine. It's a movie. We got to have it, right?
Yep.
That's how you sell the movie, Then, after the fight,
Perfect.
Jack finds out that, one of the guys in the operation shows up and tells him that there's some discrepancies in what Rainbow is giving him and what that Sniper has been finding out on the phone, as we find out that they've bugged their apartment. So what's going on is Rainbow's giving them different information than the professor is getting on the phone. And this creates a problem. So this now tells Jack that there's probably something fishy going on with the professor, is what they assume at that point.
I'm a little confused here. I get that there's a bug in the apartment.
Yeah.
And what's going on? What's the discrepancy?
So, as we discussed, Rainbow's handing information out to Jack. Well, what she's doing is handing him a cloth or a paper with handwriting on it. When they went and bugged her apartment, they're able to listen to Sniper, who's the professor, talk on the phone and have conversations with other people. So they're actually hearing him get the information. And what's happening is the information he's getting has not been written on those notes. In fact, there's been different information written on their notes. So this leads them to believe that Sniper is actually the one that's dealing out the information. But we discover quickly when Jack confronts her,
because right now he's going to her to say, "You're in trouble. The professor has betrayed you."
Yeah, you're being betrayed by your professor, this guy that you love so much and care deeply for.
Because there's different information that he's giving to certain people that's not showing up in your notes.
Right. Or that he's getting, and it's not showing up on the notes. Well, this is when she tells Jack, no, I am the one that's betrayed you and the professor, and we find out that Rainbow was the one that was compromised. So at some point, the KGB figured out that this exchange was going on. They found her and threatened her, and what she's been doing is bringing the notes to them, and they edit the information, and she brings the new edited note to Jack.
Okay. What do we think? We don't know what the KGB has on her, do we?
No, other than they could probably threaten her life. We don't know what the leverage they used was, but you know, they probably could have threatened to kill her. They could have threatened to deport her, or send her back or whatever, or hurt the professor or whatever. But at this point, we find out that what they did is at some point during the Rainbow Operation, they found out and then approached her and flipped her, and basically were using her to spread misinformation to the CIA.
Okay, cool. So we're caught up on that now.
Which is, I don't know if we brought up earlier why we think that she was flipped at the point when she goes to the opera, because she was so adamant about not wanting to get closer to Jack. Then all of a sudden is going like head first into like this like huge romance with Jack. Well, and that's why we believe that might have been the time, because she came on the date after she was missing for 2 weeks.
Actually, no. I'm checking it right now. No, it's before she was missing. So that part was. I mean, that seemed good. But maybe that's part of this. We're going to talk about this more at the end, but let's mention it right now. I think this might be one of those cases where the movie might have been choppily edited, because it does really feel right. Well, actually, maybe not, because he says he's inviting her to the ballet. She says no, but then it's only a couple days later that she says yes, and she was missing for like several weeks, so that doesn't jive. That part doesn't jive. I don't think
I think
that.
it was like 2 weeks.
Yeah,
It was. Yeah.
I don't think there was that big of a difference between, he doesn't show up at the ballet and say, "Where were you? I was so worried about you."
Yeah.
But yeah, let's see. What else do we have? Oh, let's go right into the finale. We're right there. The finale for Operation Rainbow. Back in Washington, in the main plot, this is the point where Taridi lays out his case versus Philby, and Philby flees. And then the doctor either suicides or is murdered.
Right.
And she commits suicide before the KGB can get to her, and before Jack can get her safely out of Berlin.
Right, which is what he wanted to do, but now that she's, they got there like right at the wait, a little too late to have the heroic saving scene, so it ends in a sad scene.
It's a very classically tragic scene. I mean, it's kind of well done, but just from a story point of view, like we've seen this a million times.
Right, exactly.
It's kind of just by the numbers.
Yeah.
And so here, now that we're like at the end of the movie, Jack asks his boss, Taridi. So again, like the main plot has been collapsed and finished. Philby's been fingered. Philby has fled. Jack and Taridi are having a talk in their office, and Jack asks his boss very pointedly.
Yeah.
He
you?
Says like, don't lie to me.
Yeah. Did you like? He basically accused him of throwing Rainbow under the bus. That was part of the barium meal. To which Taridi then says, "On my mother's grave," and pours out 2 shots for each of them to drink to together. But we were talking earlier about this, and we think
he denies it.
Completely denies it, and it gives one of those, "I never would do that. That was my crown jewel, and on my mother's grave, I would never have done that."
Says, I would have given up a lot to get this mole in MI6. But this operation, this Rainbow operation, this was my, like you said, crown jewel. Yeah. I was super proud of this operation. I never would have given up the professor.
Right, exactly.
I don't believe him.
But
I don't believe him.
Yeah, I don't believe him either.
I don't believe him at all.
I think he did throw her under the bus, and
now we're having Jack learn the reality of the spy world. Because in that shot where they're drinking together, I think Jack kind of stares off, and I think he's contemplating whether or not he should believe Tariti. And so I think Jack might have figured out that's what happened, or he's still questioning it.
I think it's really clear from that scene that we're meant to think that. Now, but let's take it from the top, chain of events. Suspicion there's a mole in MI6.
Mm-hmm.
Operation Rainbow begins. We get legit information. Trying to suss out whether or not there really is an MI6 mole, we have our first barium meal. That leads to the church ambush, confirming there's a mole at MI6. It is at this point that she disappears. It kind of seems, it's suggested that possibly she was compromised by Tariti in the first barium meal, and that's why she disappears for a while. But it also, I don't know if that exactly holds water. Maybe it does. Maybe it does.
So back to your
maybe
point about the cuts.
Tariti might have put more information in the barium meal than he let Jack know about. All he tells Jack is that I told them that I know who the mole is, and they're going to try to kill me. If someone tries to kill me in the next 24 hours, there's a mole at MI6.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happens. Possibly, he also put the information in there about Rainbow, but why would you? Because just the thing of them trying to kill him should be enough.
That should be enough, because he already released the information. That's why, this goes back to your point about cutting the movie. I think you do have a good point about how it was cut, because there's moments like this throughout this whole story where it's like, well, wait a minute, if this is the case, then this is what should have happened, but it ends up not going out in that order. So we're not sure exactly what was on that information, and it could have been.
She might have been mentioned in the first barium meal. Some parts of the movie seem to suggest that she was, but it doesn't seem to make sense to us unless Tariti somehow thought that he needed to put two juicy pieces of information in there. Maybe the mole wouldn't try to get him killed, but if Rainbow disappeared, then that would also confirm his suspicions. So if he put both pieces of information and both things happened, then he's like even extra sure. Right?
Well, here's the deal. Maybe she was compromised because they were watching Jack or something. And they were following him and seeing their meetings at this ballet thing, which at that point, that's how she could have been compromised. And they didn't have Sniper. They only had her. Or, that's why I don't think he did put anything about Rainbow in the first barium meal, because when he's talking to his British friend, releasing the second barium meal, he's like, this one's really juicy. He has to give out real information. It's really important that he does that. And so I think him putting himself out there in the first barium meal was enough to confirm there was a mole, but now he's going to sell out the Rainbow operation. And if anything happens, he knows that he has got the mole by the balls, so to speak.
There's a good possibility. Now, remember, this miniseries is based on a novel, and chain of events in the novel might have been laid out a little more thickly. And even though, like in this miniseries, it just revolves around two barium meals. One to establish definitely there's a mole at MI6. A second one to establish that it's Philby. Now that seems awfully abbreviated to me. I mean, that is just basically 2 steps. Like that's 2 moves in a chess game. That's not really complicated shit.
No.
In more likelihood, there's probably a much longer series of barium meals, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
To slowly narrow it down and consistently.
Well, that's the funny thing too. I think Angleton, when he's talking to Tariti in his garden, he's talking about gardening is a lot like counterintelligence. It takes a lot of patience. He's like growing orchids. Even if there is a bloom, it takes a 12 months for it to like come out of the ground, and then like 5 years for them to bloom. So he makes this whole speech about how
much patience and intricate and like, long-term counterintelligences, and then these barium meals are like within like a month, you know. Like,
Right. Yeah, we don't really know the timeline, but yeah. So here's my theory. Is that in the novel there were more barium meals than just a 1-2, and
Yeah.
in the novel one of the intermediary barium meals was uh, tipping the KGB off to Rainbow. When they condensed it into this single episode of this series, they clumsily tried to like kind of fit both into one barium meal. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
That scans for me.
Yeah. But I just go back to your point that there's probably some bad cuts that they just kind of had to throw things together in post.
Well, I'm gonna throw the big one out right now.
Yeah.
Like, here's the really big one to me. We talked earlier about the fact that we don't know, and we're never told, or even hinted, what the contents of the second barium meal is. Notice they never talk about it, even in the Washington briefing.
He just says it's really juicy.
He says it's really juicy. And it's right after he lays out his case in Washington. So presumably the second barium meal has paid off. Whoever, that Philby, having been given the information, has acted on it, and that only Philby had that information. And so now is when Charity absolutely knows that it's Philby. And it's after this, in the movie, pretty much right after this, that the KGB make their move on the professor and Rainbow.
Right.
Doesn't it seem like this movie would make so much more sense if that scene had happened right before?
Right. Because then he would come in. Yeah.
And that was his confirmation.
That it was Philby.
Right.
Yeah, but
which, by the way,
see, he's actually not sure of himself. He's just like, he doesn't have any damning evidence. He just has evidence that makes Philby look really bad, and that's why Angleton refuses to accept the fact that it's Philby. And he says to him, the big smoking gun, according to Taridi, is the extraction. No one else. Taridi says
from the extraction from the very beginning of the movie.
From the very beginning of the movie, because he says, I specifically did not let MI6 know about this. And the only person who could have gotten it that would have been from Philby, because you gave it to him. Because no one else would have known this information, and that's the only way. So that's like where his argument kind of hinges. And all these barium meals, even though they've paid off and proven there is a mole, Angleton's still not convinced. And so I think that might be why they've cut it that way, because the second barium meal doesn't really narrow anybody down.
It narrows down, and I think it does narrow down to Philby, but Angleton is still at that. It narrows it down to Philby, but Angleton is still saying, like, well, there's other places the leak could have come from along the chain. He's like, there's secretaries, there's couriers, there's all sorts of people, but then you're right. Then that's when they ask Angleton point blank, though. And it's not Taridi that levels this. I think it's Dulles or whatever. It's the head guy at the meeting, right? Anyways, the head guy at the meeting that asks Angleton, okay, so did you tell Philby about the extraction?
Oh, I think that was Dulles.
Right. And Angleton is like, well, yeah, I did, but I've known the guy for 15 years, blah, blah, blah. And that's when they bring up the fact that, like, right after that is when the radio transmissions went nuts between the embassy and Moscow.
Right, exactly.
So I think, I think that if we were to go to the novel, and it's weird, like, the wiki on the miniseries is like very rich, and you can get a lot of information, people talking about the miniseries. I couldn't find people like discussing the plot of the book, but I suspect that in the book, it's Charity sold out Rainbow like completely sold out Rainbow and Sniper. Oh, and by the way, I think he knew. I think he was. This is also important. I think that he was willing also to sell her out, even though it's super cold-hearted. It's. I mean, let's put a point in this. If true, Tariq is a cold-hearted motherfucker, right?
Yeah.
And a good liar.
And a good liar.
But also he would have been more willing to sell Rainbow out if he already knew that she had been turned. And follow me through on this logic. They tapped the apartment right at the beginning of Operation Rainbow.
Yeah, it was right at the beginning. After the first meeting, they sent guys to follow her.
Jack does not immediately notice. I mean, this is presumably happens over months. Jack does not immediately notice that there's discrepancies after she disappears and reappears. The discrepancies begin appearing in her deliveries of information, right?
Yeah, and that's why. Oh, and Taridi, when Jack is upset that she's missing, he kind of is nonchalant about it. Hey, whatever, she'll be back. You know, your agent goes missing and you don't care. You know, he's got to know something.
Right. So my point is, somebody's listening to the transmissions. Somebody is running this operation one step above Jack, and that is Taridi. So probably Taridi has the he is seeing the discrepancies like much earlier in the story. Right. And maybe again that would tie into my theory that an intermediary barium meal was to tip off the KGB or tip off somebody in the MI6, probably again as this kind of like funneling operation of like narrowing it down right. Of who it could be. That one part of it is to let them know about Rainbow, and then Taridi will be able to see because all the he's probably got one agent. He's got Jack who's giving him the information of what she's giving on the silk. He's got another agent who's probably in charge of listening to the wiretap, and that's Radio Guy. We didn't mention there's a few other characters that are at Berlin Station.
They're just not established. Yeah, they're just
mostly they don't get named, but there's one guy that always seems to be in charge of all the radio stuff.
Yeah.
Right? We keep calling him Radio Guy when we're talking about this movie.
Yeah.
He's the guy that put in the bug. He's the guy that's always like monitoring transmissions and stuff. So Taridi's probably getting the one information from Jack of what she's delivering. He's getting the other information from radio operator. And so Taridi can put the pieces together and tell that she's been compromised. But he doesn't let anybody know. Like Jack and the radio operator aren't talking to each other.
Yeah.
So again, this is also why he would be willing. So and what does he do? He doesn't act on that immediately. First of all, he just says, aha, this is confirmation that one of my barium meals has succeeded.
Right.
Because after I, did this one, which, like we said, it's probably an intermediary one that isn't explicitly shown in the movie. But he doesn't act on it immediately, because why would you? Now you have some other information. Now you know something that the enemy doesn't know, that you don't know, that they know, that they are lying to you, or something like that. It's a hall of mirrors, which is something that gets mentioned several times in the film. Yeah. But I think, end of the day, I feel like the person that was doing the final edit wasn't really all that interested in making the plot make super sense, but was just making the movie as dramatic as possible and ending with the really the emotional finale of the film isn't even though it's like the main plot, the main finale is like, we got Philby, but that's like wah. The emotional finale is Rainbow getting killed or killing herself.
Right, exactly.
And so somebody in the editing department felt like it was more important for that to be the last thing in the movie instead of happening right before the Washington scene.
Right. Yeah. And that way, for dramatic effect. Yeah. So I think you might be right about the cut.
And now we're going to talk about Yevgeny. Yevgeny is a character that basically he's a, what do you call this guy? I mean, he's a KGB spy for sure.
Yeah.
Um, what is there a term that we should be using for someone that's like he's undercover in the U.S. He's not a sleep. Well, he's kind of a sleeper agent. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I would probably call him a cutout. He's basically a middleman for information.
I'm
So
sorry. Is it cut out a spy term?
yeah, that's basically yeah. I think it's a cutout. It's basically a person that separates the chain of information. That way, people can't be implicated. So, like, if I'm the guy collecting the information and I got to get it to headquarters, there's usually a intermediary between me and headquarters, and it could be a chain of several people. But that's what he is. He's getting information and sending information, and then receiving information and sending information.
Right. He's set up like a sleeper agent is someone that like just is put in place and like waits for like a long, long time until they need to be activated, right?
Right.
And
So I'm not saying.
Yevgeny is more like he gets told that, just stay in place, keep your cover. You're a liquor. You deliver wine, right?
Yeah.
And you might go a year without getting instructions. You might go months. Just here and there, there's something that we'll need you to do.
Right.
And you're right. Like mostly his role seems to be like as an intermediary to keep parties distant from each other. For instance, he ends up being the person that interacts with Philby. Sometimes he delivers instructions to Philby.
Well, he was actually put into America after the news of the CIA figuring out there was a mole came out. So I think they put him in place so that they could send information to Philby, because Philby, being the mole, is just sending information he's getting to Russia. But there's no way for them to get him information quickly. So,
and this all occurs in the U.S. and so I don't think we ever see Philby outside of the U.S. I guess maybe he's like an MI6 liaison.
Well, yeah, he's an MI6 agent, like on the surface, but that's he just hangs out with, he probably told the MI6 that he's homies with Angleton, and that he could be like a liaison from the MI6 to the CIA. So that's probably what his official, I guess, responsibilities are, quote unquote. When in reality, he's like sending information to Russia.
Right. He definitely has a home in Washington because that's where Yevgeny meets him from time to time.
Right. And he's meeting for dinner like every week with Angleton.
Right. And presumably he's not flying back and forth from London to Washington just to have dinner.
Right, exactly.
So enough about that, though. Let's talk about Yevgeny. He's I don't know if this is going to become important later in the series, but early in the movie, we had a scene where Jack gets recruited into the CIA, and before Jack gets recruited into to the CIA, we see him at Yale, and he's got two friends, one of which is Yevgeny.
Yep.
And while Jack gets recruited into the CIA, Yevgeny, while I believe visiting his home, Russia, to attend a funeral, I think of his father.
Oh, yeah, because we don't see the dead.
Right. I think
that's probably what he's there for, is the funeral.
That's when the Russian spy master, Starek, recruits him into the KGB. He lets him know, your father, you never knew this your whole life, Yevgeny, but your father worked for me in the KGB. I am a KGB general, and I'm offering you an opportunity to join the ranks. And I do like the fact in this movie, and I like this in the Americans too, that they paint the Russian perspective on what they're doing and what their mission for the world is in very, egalitarian terms.
Yeah.
They really do seem to think that their way of life is better and that they're saving the world. They're not trying to dominate. What they're really doing is trying to dominate the world. But what it honestly believes that all the way up to the highest levels of the
That-
Communist Party.
Yeah. That they're spreading the love of communism, and that they really believe this, and they're doing God's work at this point. Like
Right. So even though in some movies the KGB agent might be seen as, this underhanded villain, we really have sympathy for Yevgeny. We like him. He's my favorite character in the movie, flat out. I love this guy.
And later in the miniseries, he gets really cool. We get for this, we don't get a whole lot of very much tradecraft from him. It's like, he's breaking codes and stuff. And his training, we get like a montage of him shooting stuff and kicking things, and
we get a pretty cool montage. Yeah, they teach him how to shoot, they teach him how to fight, they teach him how to hide stuff. They tell him that when he's undercover, he's even gonna make love differently than the way he makes love when he's in his other alternate personality. It's great.
Right.
I love it.
Yeah.
The actor is good.
Yeah, he's a really good actor.
I was disappointed. I was disappointed when I looked him up that he's not in as much stuff as I think he deserves to be based on this performance. All of his scenes in this movie are very good.
Very, very good. And we don't. But, for his character, most of his characters, I guess, development is spent on him and the girlfriend, because the tradecraft we get from him is just showing up, picking up envelopes, decoding stuff, and then dropping off information for stuff.
Oh man, I think you're selling the tradecraft short on this, but I'm gonna be happy to talk about it in a minute.
He's a really important person, but it's all pretty much set in motion. He's not playing chess or anything. He's just kind of following the protocols.
I see what you mean, and it comes up from time to time when I use the word tradecraft. Maybe you and I are not talking about the exact same thing, because it seems like some of the stuff we're about to talk about that Yevgeny does is very elaborate. It's very elaborate spy stuff.
Yeah, but he's not playing chess.
He's not fucking with people's heads.
Yeah, and no, I agree with you. He has tons of tradecraft.
He's a soldier.
What he does, he's following protocol. He listens to the radio. He gets the message. He follows the instructions, and he go and does the thing. But he's not putting in barium meals like our boy Toridi.
Right.
He's not planning out this huge elaborate mole plan like Starrick is.
He's right. He's absolutely not central to the plot. He could have easily been plugged in with a generic KGB agent that we don't know or care anything about. But like you said, he's going to become more interesting later in the series. And I got a question for you. Now, so I mentioned that Jack and Yevgeny are old friends from Yale.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're no longer in contact with each other.
Right. He went back to the motherland.
They have
the thing is Yevgeny spent a lot of time in the state and sounds like an American. He talks like an American. He understands their thing, and this is primarily why he's so valuable to Starrick. Because when he comes back home to Russia, they're like, "You talk like an American. We should take advantage of this."
He also speaks 3 other languages.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
He's an excellent placement. So as you said, Yevgeny gets put in place. So obviously, or not obviously, but presumably, they picked his station of deployment to be close to Philby, and like you say, that's shortly after that first barium, or it's at least after the extraction, and I think it's after the first barium meal.
Right.
But he's just supposed to be in place and just to chill there, right? But he does get in his instructions. He gets it from a dead drop. Woohoo, dead drops. We love dead drops.
Yeah, we do.
He gets his first dead drop of codes from a dumpster marked with a big X.
Yeah.
Did you catch the X?
I did catch the X, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that was, I mean, I only caught it after like my third viewing or something, but when I
Yeah.
did catch it, I was like, okay, wah, wah.
Minus 5 points.
Minus 5 points for that, but so many plus 5 points for everything else that happens here.
Yeah.
He sets up his radio and he gets his orders to deliver items to Philby.
Yeah. And those items, like, it was a bunch of weapons and like listening devices and also further instructions.
Sure, which we're not sure what the items are supposed to be. It's just supposed to be to establish that Yevgeny is the guy that is an intermediary, a way for them to get stuff and information to Philby and information from Philby. Here's another bad edit, I think. When Yevgeny first meets Philby, Philby passes the information to Yevgeny that Taridi in Berlin knows that there's a mole at MI6 and might even know that it's me.
Which would be bad.
Right, and he does so very meaningfully. But this happened after the church ambush. Again, I think it would have made more sense if we'd seen this before the church ambush. But at this point, I think for dramatic effect, the editor didn't want us to know that Philby was the mole before we saw the church ambush. They wanted us to see the church ambush and then, dramatic reveal. This scene where Yevgeny delivers stuff to Philby is mainly a cinematic device to tell us, the audience, yes, Philby is the mole.
Right.
Even though the characters don't know it yet, now we, the audience, are let in on that secret.
Yeah. That makes sense. But
so let's talk about how the chain. I want to talk about the chain of events. It's so deliciously elaborate of how Yevgeny gets his information.
Yeah.
He's
a really cool tradecraft. Yeah.
He sets up, once he's set up in Washington, he sets up his big radio antenna and he's got a big radio set.
Yeah.
Which you often see in older spy movies. And so I'm guessing like he's not setting up to just receive like the transmissions of the local radio stations and rock and roll. He needs a powerful radio set that will actually capture radio signals from Russia.
Right. Well, I don't know that he's picking up radio signals from Russia in the U.S. I think there's a Russian radio show in the U.S. that he's listening to.
Okay. That's totally plausible. But notice, like, his radio set is elaborate.
Yeah, he's got a serious radio set. Yeah.
It's not just like a radio that you just have to listen to music. It's a radio that it's powerful.
Yeah.
You sit at, you hunch over it, you tweak little dials, many dials, and like kind of tune in on the signal, and you listen with big fucking cans on your head. But anyways, so he listens to the broadcast, and what I think is interesting here, he listens to here's what we see. We see him listening to the broadcast, and there's a quiz show, and the answer to the quiz relates to Alice in Wonderland.
Right. And then he perks up, grabs a pen, and starts writing or getting ready to write.
Right. And this isn't explained in the movie, but from the wiki, we get that his code names, or not his code names, but his cover names are Eugene Dodgson and Gene Lutwidge. Now, I wouldn't have known this at all except for checking the wiki, but Lewis Carroll, the author of Alice in Wonderland, his real name was Charles Lutwidge Dodgson.
Oh, so that's where they got the last names from.
Right. So this would pertain to, we're not sure what Yevgeny's code name is. It's never said, but his code name might have been like Lewis Carroll or something. But what I'm saying is, like, he's meant to be tied into the notion of Alice in Wonderland. And here's how I think this works. The Russians have many agents in place that are all listening to the same broadcast.
Right.
And but what you're supposed to do as this Russian agent is you're supposed to listen to the quiz show answer, and if the quiz show answer pertains to you, then the following information is for you. All the other agents would have been listening to the same broadcast, and as soon as they heard the quiz answer, they would say, okay, that's not for me. The next
Absolutely.
thing, right?
Every time that he starts writing down, it's the same answer. You know, it's just the quiz show. They ask a question, and the answer is Alice in Wonderland.
It's only when the answer pertains to Alice in Wonderland that he suddenly like perks up. And the next thing they do is give out the lottery numbers, which he furiously scribbles down, right?
Yeah.
Those lottery numbers seem to translate to a phone number. He calls the phone. That gives him instructions to meet at a park bench. It's our second park bench. He sits down and picks up a package from another guy that's sitting, two spies sitting at a park bench. I set my bag down. You pick it up and walk away. Park bench. He picks up the package. Okay, so we went from radio signal to code to give him some numbers, which gave him a phone number, which gave him instructions to meet at a park bench, to pick up a package. He's not done yet.
No.
He's then supposed to go to a very specific book in a library at a very specific time in which there's another phone number, a code phrase, and a torn piece of Jell-O packaging.
Yep.
This is almost starting to seem like too much, but I love it. Fucking love it.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, when I think about it, there's so many places along this chain that it could break down.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. If he makes like one small mistake, it's over.
Right. But the torn piece of Jell-O packaging, you hit this one. What's so fucking cool about that?
Well, with the Jell-O, it's a torn piece of Jell-O, and it actually fits another piece.
Which is held by
Philby.
Philby.
Yeah, he takes it to Philby. The Jell-O packaging matches, and it's kind of like their. Yeah.
So in the book in the library, he got the phone number. He apparently got the code phrase to call and ask about a car that Philby is supposedly selling.
Yeah. He was like, it was like a classified ad of like, yeah, I heard you're selling this car. I was wondering if I could go take a look at it.
And when they match those two torn pieces of Jell-O packaging, because they tore it in two, and Philby has one, Yevgeny has the other, or it's delivered to Yevgeny, and that's a perfect, beautiful fucking confirmation. That's better than any code phrase, right?
Right. Yeah. Basically, this is verifying Yevgeny's identity.
Which goes to show like just how much the Russians want to make sure that Philby is protected.
Yeah, they're going through leaps and bounds to make sure he's okay.
The next time Yevgeny shows up in the movie, it's another very similar scene. He's getting more orders. He receives a package.
Mm-hmm.
Contents of the package are unknown. And this occurs right after, in case it matters, in case you're looking to say everything's supposed to mean something and the timing is right, even though we think the editing of this movie is kind of shit on close examination. But if you're like trying to follow the logic of the movie and the timing very closely, he gets these orders right after the compromised rainbow is put back in the field. It also happens immediately before Borisov propositions Jack in the nightclub. So if we're trying to figure out what this package and these orders mean, it should pertain somehow to Operation Rainbow, I think.
Absolutely.
we do the same kind of thing, with the decoding and stuff, and the radio and the listening and Alice in Wonderland, using the lottery numbers as a code. We get a little more detail here, though. This time, he has to run the code that he got from the lottery numbers. He has to match them, or he has to write them, and then also write down underneath them in a slightly offset column. He writes down the serial numbers of a $10 bill. And then he does some maths to come up with the actual code.
And that's the phone number.
That's the phone number, which gives him the location of a dead drop. And the dead drop sends him to another park bench. Before we go further, I want to say, too, there's something tricky about the $10 note that he got. It was somebody had written on it, to Eugene on his 8th birthday. Love,
Dad. Well, Yevgeny is actually Russian for Eugene.
You brought that up. I love that. I love that specific thing. Although, minus 5 spy points. Minus 5 spy points for the KGB.
Why? What did they do?
If you're gonna make Yevgeny, if you have a guy named Yevgeny that you're gonna send him to the U.S. to pose as an American, why would you have him use the American version of his Russian name as his cover name?
Yeah, that's kind of silly.
That's minus 5 points for the KGB.
It's probably just a cinematic Easter egg.
Oh yeah, totally. I like it.
Yeah.
And I also like the fact, like, the thinking about the note. What's written. I mean, the movie, just in case it's not clear, audience, I want to specify. We noticed this by, like, aggressively pause framing the movie. This note on the $10 bill is not something that is, like, presented to the audience as a major plot point.
Yeah.
But because we are the guys who watch too much, we're like freeze framing, and we're thinking about this $10 bill.
We went through this scene so many times trying to break this code, and we thought it was subtraction, but then there's all these random other numbers. I think they just kind of like threw some numbers together and made it look like he was doing it.
I think they told him to write something, or maybe it was supposed to be subtraction, but then the actor halfway through was like, I don't know, just thinking about something else and just started writing numbers.
Yeah.
But I love, okay, so the idea of the $10 bill, though, what this means to me, I think, is you could drop one of these dead drops or something, or a lost $10 bill. Actually, I think it's because it should have been like, it was probably like more money than this, like maybe a little packet of money, right?
Uh-huh.
A packet of, like, I don't know, a couple $100 in tens. If some random person finds this, they're just going to think, oh, I found some money. Might be mob money. Maybe I'm not supposed to pick it up. But, maybe I will. And if there's a birthday note written on one of them, doesn't mean anything to me, right?
Right, exactly.
If a CIA agent finds this money, are they looking through and noticing that somebody scribbled something on it's just a little birthday note. It doesn't mean anything.
Right, but with that information, they wouldn't be able to figure anything out. They would have to know everything else behind that message.
Also, right, and also it's to Eugene on his 8th birthday. So how could that shouldn't apply to Yevgeny, even though he's using the cover name Eugene, because Eugene is not, or Yevgeny is not 8 fucking years old.
Right.
But Yevgeny, looking through this money, would know that this was important to him. Or maybe even it's even more elaborate than that, and he goes to a store to buy something, and it's an agent at the cashier, another Russian agent that is meant to make sure he gets this $10 bill in change. With which he can go home, listen to the radio, listen for his code name, write down the lottery numbers, decode from the $10 bill, turn that into a phone number, get the instructions to go to a dead drop. The dead drop then sends him to, again, please, we already called this one out, but I'm going to call it out one more time. a park bench. He sits down next to a guy. They do a code phrase spoken in Russian, from which he gets another package. I'm gonna mention this. Even though I loved this, it doesn't mean anything. We never find out what the package was.
That particular package, we just presume is more information or more items that Philby might need or something.
It could be anything. Doesn't fit into the plot whatsoever, and that's the main reason we kept all this Yevgeny stuff to the end of the podcast. Because if we had interspersed it in with the actual plot, it would have been highly confusing. But we're not going to do a podcast about spy movies without discussing all these Yevgeny scenes. 100%, right?
Yeah, 100%.
But finally, I mean, Yevgeny visits Philby. We see him visit Philby when it seems like the heat is on, and finally, Yevgeny is the Russian agent who makes the final preparations for Philby's flight from the United States. And that's Yevgeny. All right, so David, do you think we're ready to come in from the cold now?
Absolutely, let's do it.
Agents, please report for debriefing on this operation. The director will see you now.
So I'm going to start by saying that I liked this movie, and I'm much more keen. Okay, now it's time. I'm really actually going to call it what it is: the first episode of a 3-part television miniseries by TNT. I liked it. I really enjoyed watching it several times in preparation for this podcast. You were the one that brought this to my attention in the first place. And this is like last year. Started thinking about doing a podcast, but but we were already like kind of had like decided that we were like bros in the army of people that like spook films.
Yeah.
And you were jazzed about this one, and I remember we watched it together. I think we watched the second episode together, and then I kind of faded out on it. But now I'm more excited about watching the other two than I was at the time.
Now that we've kind of like picked it apart, yeah.
It's good Cold War stuff. It's got some really good performances from Molina and Keaton. A great performance from the guy that plays Yevgeny, I thought. It's very deliciously Cold War. It's like it ticks out, like it scratches that itch if you just like the Cold War and you like spy stuff. This movie's got a bunch of good stuff to it. Do I need to see it again? Probably not. I mean, I've just watched it like probably 4 times in the last 2 weeks. It's flawed. I think it's massively flawed in the edit, but I don't think that reads unless you've watched it religiously like multiple times, which probably a lot of people are not going to. I think it's a mediocre movie pushed up a bit by its nice representation of Cold War spy stuff, and pushed down a bit by the editing. I'll go with a. Oof. I almost want to say 3, but I think I'm going to finally go with a 2.5.
Nice. For me, funny enough, I mean, this is, I think, the second time we watched it together, and then we've watched it a couple times in the last couple of weeks to go back and look at stuff. I always really, really liked this movie, and I thought it was top notch. But when you started picking up on the timeline and looking at the events that happened, and discovered this editing kind of mess where things started to not make sense, that really like put me down on what I felt about this film, because I was super jazzed about watching this again, and I really enjoyed watching it again. But when we went and nitpicked everything, because there was so much good tradecraft. The story is really good. You know, it's a typical mole story, but like, you know, it was executed really well. But as we start nitpicking at the timeline, I realized, wow, hold on, a lot of this stuff doesn't add up. So for the most part, I really enjoyed the film, but finding out that there's like these cinematic edits just to kind of make it a better movie, like, and like just kind of disregarding like the timeline, tradecraft. I'm gonna have to drop it down. I think I'm gonna go with a 3 on this one because I really enjoy watching it. It's so much fun, but then when you find out, it's kind of like when you learn the secrets of stuff, like the magic goes away. You know,
It's just it feels a little disrespectful to people that like to pay very close attention to the
right,
plot.
right. And if you're making a movie about the Cold War and about hefty like tradecraft, that's not,
That's probably your audience.
yeah, and you're not really doing it right, you know. But he also has to have to sell the film and like make it marketable and like put a story together. So I mean, I get it. It was just really disappointing for me because I would have given this like a 4.5. Like if you asked me a year ago, but coming back to it, I was like super jazzed and I was like, yeah, I love this, you know. But
I'll tell you. There's two ways. There's two ways this movie could bump up from the 2.5 to a 3 for me.
Mhm.
Number one is this is just a possibility that has crossed my mind. After I've seen episodes 2 and 3, if they all fit together very nicely, I might be like, I feel like maybe the overall series is better than this episode. We'll have to see. You know, like
yeah,
if we ever
stuff.
do this again and nitpick
Yeah,
the hell out of like episode 2 and 3, if they have the same flaws, you're still staying at a 2.5 for the whole series.
yeah,
But if the overall series doesn't have these editing mistakes, then it's definitely a 3. Here's another way I think it could have been a 3. If you really, really wanted to do these editing things, do that thing where you show the day and time
yeah,
of a scene. That way, if you wanted to jump back and forth, I'm not saying you go full Pulp Fiction on the bitch, right?
yeah.
I'm not saying
Right.
you break it all open, but like if you want to like show me this thing and then because you already demonstrated that you were willing to do that a little bit. Your very first scene starts in 1955. The second scene of the movie, it says on the screen 4 years earlier in
Right.
Washington, 1951. That's when we see them in Yale. So you already have demonstrated a willingness to do a little bit of manipulation with the timeline. If you wanted to, for instance, show me the church ambush and tell me that that happened on a Thursday, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then show me Yevgeny getting the information from Philby that Taridi is a problem, but you tell me that that happened on Wednesday, I'm perfectly fine with the fact that you showed them to me in the opposite order of chronology because you explicitly stated it.
Yeah.
So that's another way. Easy way it could have been a 3. You do both of those together and I'm a 3.5. What
Yeah,
about
I mean, from watching it before, I know that it gets much more intense, but I don't know how tight it is. But yeah, definitely should get back on talking about this after you finish the last 2 episodes, because that'd be kind of cool to talk
Yeah,
about.
we might bring it back in. We might bring it back in a future episode. So we've reviewed the movie, as a piece of art, a piece of entertainment. But we also like on this podcast to go in and give the tradecraft a detailed rating, and that's what we call a redaction rating. And on our way into that, we like to give our top 3 best and worst tradecraft movies. Moments of the movie. I'm gonna start. I'm gonna start with my top 3 best, or my number 3 out of 3 best tradecraft moment. The Borisov nightclub offer. We talked about it in detail.
Yeah, yeah, that was fun.
I loved it. I loved it because it was something that we had fun piecing out together, like why this would make sense and how it worked out, whether Jack accepted the deal or declined the deal. Either way, the KGB benefits. So that's my number 3.
Well, mine was them, the Tarides guys immediately following Rainbow to go bug her apartment and verify the information. I think that was, pretty much tradecraft 101 right there, and I think it was great that they put that in the movie. That it wasn't just like, here we're getting information, that they actually went out of their way to verify that information.
I like that one too, and it was also it was a cute scene because they had to they're on an upstairs apartment, and there's a lady that lives downstairs who never leaves her apartment.
Yeah.
And so they had to do this little mini op where they figured out a way to get her out of the apartment, which they basically offered her like free medical care.
So, yeah.
And when she's still doubtful about it, they offer her a new radio.
Yeah.
Very cute. My number 2, once again, this is something we talked about in detail, so I won't have to talk about it too much here. Just the whole Alice in Wonderland codename thing on the radio. That idea. Again, I like it because it's something that I had to discover by carefully investigating the movie. It's not something the movie explicitly put in my face, that there's many agents that are listening to the same broadcast, and they'll hear the right code name that pertains to them, and that's when they need to start paying very close attention. But when we watched that scene over and over, it was very rewarding to figure that out, and that's why that's my number 2.
That's a good one. My number 2 is when the KGB found out about Rainbow, instead of killing her, they just flipped her. And they started using her to spread disinformation. I mean, again, some tradecraft 101, and I'm glad that they did it in a movie. They didn't just... And they didn't make a really big deal about it. Like, it wasn't some huge scene. Like, the big deal was later we find out she was compromised the whole time. But just the idea of them not eliminating this person, but using them to their benefit after they found out that she had been giving out information.
100% agree, dude. And it's not the only instance. Like, this whole movie is probably, like, the best part of this movie is all the instances of when you find out what the enemy is doing, you don't immediately like jump on them and like shut that down. You instead try to figure out how you can twist it to your advantage. It's all about what you know that they think they know that you don't know.
Right.
Hall of Mirrors. Yeah, love it. Here's another one I don't have to explain because we did it before. Jello package. It's just the perfect validation. Even like an electronic, like even in the modern age in 2019, you couldn't do better than this. Like a computer handshake, like a computer code or a code phrase or any kind of cryptogram. You could not fake the torn piece of packaging matching perfectly. It's fucking brilliant. That's my number 1.
I think that was really clever, as to validate that. Yeah, this is the person that's supposed to be here. My number 1 is the KGB planning a second mole, for when they threw Philby under the bus. So the KGB figured out that Philby was found out, and at some point they had to get him out of there to protect his life or save him or protect him from getting compromised. And they had a mole that they already had planted waiting there just for when Philby gets taken out. So I thought that was really cool. That was definitely like KGB general playing chess against the CIA, where he's just like, all right, we have to lose. We are going to lose our mole, but it's okay. I have another one. So when the CIA are like, oh wow, the mole's gone, they won't know that there is another one that's like been running things already.
Very good. Why don't you? That's our top 3 best tradecraft. Why don't you take the lead on worst?
So my number 3 worst is Jack falling in love with Rainbow. I can't. I mean, like, yeah, it's a spy movie. There's got to be a romance between somebody involved or whatever. I get it. It's there for cinematic reasons. I get it. It does happen in real life all the time. You know, where spies like leave because they fall in love with someone, or they. But it's just, come on, man, and it happens so fast. Like, he's in love with her. Like,
To be fair, it's his first, not his first operation, but it's his first operation that he's handling.
That's true, yeah. And he's a young buck out of college type of thing. And
He's
he
Chris
doesn't have
O'Donnell.
the years.
He's Chris O'Donnell. He's got to fuck something.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I mean, that's just gonna put him in a bad position, and it did. And he learned the lesson that probably Torides learned several times in his life. So.
My number 3 for worst is Angleton telling Philby about the extraction at the beginning of the movie. Again, I think we talked about the fact that we don't know that Angleton was the leak specifically, but in this movie he is the leak, and it's for someone that is set up and represented by this movie as being this super genius of counterintelligence. He makes the single, most rookie mistake that should be the first thing you teach counterintelligence people not to do on day 1 of counterintelligence class. What's your number 3?
Yeah. You mean my number 2?
I'm sorry, your number 2.
Yeah, my number 2 is why they went to the opera to begin with. You know, like, he's trying to establish this relationship with her, but why is he going out being seen with her when, like, this is a really sensitive, operation? Why? Not only did he fall in love with her, but, like, why are they going out to the opera dressed up all fancy and stuff when it's already established that he's been seeing her for information and stuff like that? I just thought it was silly. But again, it's for the movie. It's telling the story, but I just thought, I don't know. I would have never done that. Even if you're going to date your agent or whatever, I'm not going out to the opera with a bunch of people. We're going to go meet at some discreet location on a park bench. Yeah.
Dave.
What about you? What's your
Dave?
number 2?
Yeah. No. We can't proceed. Let me tell you why.
Okay.
I now suspect you've been compromised. And I'm going to tell you why.
Okay. All right.
And I've marked this time in the thing because it was the ballet, motherfucker, not the opera.
Oh, that's right.
And I'm gonna strip in the audio from that scene right now.
That'll be great. Yeah. I totally forgot about that.
All right, no, you're good. You're good. Yeah. But I'm doing that.
Yeah, totally.
My number 2. Oh, my number 2, Taridi telling Mr. Fussy, which is my little pet name for his London contact that he arranges the barium meals with. Which I don't mean that dismissively. I thought the even though that guy's got exactly 2 scenes? He's got exactly 2 scenes, right? He's pretty cool in both of them. I liked him.
Yeah, I liked him a lot. He actually was one of my favorite characters. He's like,
but he had this little fussiness about him, though.
Yeah, he was super fussy. He
seemed annoyed. Like, he seemed annoyed by anything that he needed to do related to spying. Like, he says he's 2 months from retirement. 2 years from retirement. He does play it off exactly like a guy that is 2 years away from a British guy. He's very British.
Yeah, very British.
He plays it off exactly like a British guy that's spent his whole life doing this shit and is just fucking tired of it, you know?
Yeah.
File reports.
He doesn't want to get shot or hurt or whatever. He just wants to finish off his years and go like he said, he wants to be drinking whiskey.
But as I said before, and I don't remember the exact number, but I am deducting spy points from Taridi for telling Mr. Fussy about the barium meal plan right after he's confirmed that, and Mr. Fussy has confirmed to him that he is wearing a wire. So other people from MI6 could hear about it. So then,
The
well,
mole could hear about it.
but again, maybe I got this one wrong, because again, this first barium meal was only supposed to establish that someone at MI6 was a mole. So maybe I got that one wrong. But it felt wrong with me at the time, and I'm not gonna change it right now. What's your number one?
My number one was actually the same as your number three. Here's the head of counterintelligence telling Philby about the extraction the night before the extraction. Like, fine, you guys are buddies for 15 years and you guys want to talk and like go have dinner or whatever. All right, fine, but are you really gonna tell the guy like the night before you have this like very
Just wait one day. Just wait one day.
Yeah, just wait till it was done and then talk to him about it later. There was no even if they share information. Let's pretend Philby wasn't the mole and they share information and they're buddies.
There's no reason for Philby to know this. It's
Yeah,
not.
he's not getting it.
There's such a thing as a need to know basis.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about a possible mole in MI6, you know who's at the top of the not need to know list? MI6.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I'm going number one.
Yeah.
I'm hitting it.
Yeah. All right, what's your number one?
I don't know if you remember this scene. We didn't talk about it. There's a lot, they mentioned like the Hall of Mirrors. They talk about the back and forth. I like Hall of Mirrors as a metaphor in this movie is very well done. Very well done. Like we talked about, like you don't, you present a certain thing when you know something about what the other person knows. You don't let them know. You do something that it's so great. It's so complicated and wonderful. You know what's not wonderful is at the very beginning of Operation Rainbow, on Jack's travel through Berlin to meet the ballerina, codename Rainbow, for the very first time, he's being tailed. Do you remember this?
I don't remember him being tailed.
Yeah, he's being tailed by two classic, casting call Russian thugs. Fedoras. I'm not sure they had trench coats, but they feel like they have trench coats for sure.
Yeah.
He ducks into a little carnival, and he goes into the Hall of Mirrors, like the fun house.
Oh, that's right. I
Right.
forgot about that scene.
And they get confused, and it's a little bit. What am I reaching for? It's a little bit.
Okay.
Cartoonish is a word I could use. It's literally like it's insulting. It's fucking insulting. Like, anyways, he escapes them. They're bumping into mirrors. They think they see where he is. Oh, they're moving this way. Oh, that's just a mirror. And he gets away, and so he makes his first rendezvous with Rainbow.
I forgot.
I didn't.
Oh my god! Yeah, no, this is pretty hokey. Oh,
it's god awful. So, and this is a case where, because worst tradecraft, it could be something a character does. It could be an accident, that an agency does. It could be something that just doesn't seem plausible that are done by the characters within the movie. Here, I'm giving number one worst tradecraft because, you could do that, but it's just, I'm giving the movie minus 5 points for putting
it's just
that
so
little piece of garbage in our face.
It's just so cliche, and you're right. It's very cartoonish that it's insulting. It's just kind of like something that would happen in a Shirley Temple film. You know what I mean?
Yeah, old Bugs Bunny movie. I don't know. Let's give it. Let's get to, now that we've given all that, how redacted is this movie on a scale of 1 to 5? Now, again, audience, a 5. The premise here is that, let's say this movie actually reflects real events, which A lot of it really does. If we're going to give this a high reduction rating, that means we think that most of the stuff in the real events were not reflected in the movie. If we give it a low reduction rating, that means we think we're looking at an open file, we're looking at legitimate intel of what really happened. And this is just a discussion part. We're going to come to a conclusion. I want to give this one, I'm going to go with a 1.
A 1?
No, a 1. A 1 should be like absolute truth, but we have fictional characters here. So I guess
and Kim Philby being a mole was real, but I don't think most of these events actually like. I would probably put it at a 2.5 because
I'm thinking 2 tops.
2 tops.
It does all deal with. Yeah, but some of the tradecraft's a little hokey. Yeah, all right, 2.5. 2.5. Sold.
Yeah, no, because my whole thought is like, yeah, a lot of these characters are real. Yeah, Kim Philby was triple agent or double agent. Yeah, stuff like this probably did happen, but I don't think any of these are most of these weren't actual events. I don't even know that Rainbow and Sniper existed. There probably was an operation where the professor was giving information to the CIA, but like, most of this stuff isn't historical. It just happens that they used historical characters. So that's why I'm saying like a 2.5, because it's very realistic tradecraft,
There's a lot of good, juicy tradecraft to bite into. For sure. Yeah, I'll go with you. Let's call it a 2.5.
And that's the end of our show. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can find us on Twitter at spies_like us. Visit us on our website at www.spieslikeus.net. Find out about upcoming episodes. Also, what'll really help us out is if you give us a review on wherever you found our podcast, either on iTunes or your Android app or YouTube or wherever you listen to us. Even if you didn't like the show, just give us a review. It'll help us, give us feedback so we can make the show better. And it can also help other people who haven't found the show yet find out about us. Hey, Moira, initiate Protocol 9.
Protocol 9 initiated. This podcast will self-destruct in 20 seconds. The preceding transmission sampled the songs Ice Cold by Audionautics, Enter the Party by Kevin MacLeod, and sound effects from freesound.org. Attributions and links are found at spieslikeus.net. Editing by Todd Hostetler.